or anything that has to do with text with RQDA. And then the second thing we're going to look at is text mining and sentiment analysis. You can use sentiment analysis, or one of the tools I use is proximity, looking at words which are in proximity to other words. And we use the packages tidy text and text mining for that. So before we get started, just in case you didn't install RQDA, like every package, you need to have R installed, and I recommend RStudio as well. I don't think I've ever messed with R and not had RStudio. It's completely useful. Next, you'll want to install package RQDA, and so this right here would be what you type into your script. And it's important that you install the dependencies along with it. Just so you know, in case you haven't installed RQDA, and if you have installed it already, you already know this, it's kind of a big package and it's going to take a minute to download. So if you haven't downloaded it and installed it yet, just give it a second. It will take a minute to download. And after that, we read in RQDA like we do anything. We read it in the library. The first time you do this ever, it will prompt you and ask you if you want to install GKT plus, or maybe it's GTK plus, one of those. But be sure you say yes to that, because the package actually requires that, and the package isn't going to work unless you have that. And once you do that, RQDA should pop up in your window, and it should look something like this. So this is the first part of my workshop with you all. So we're going to actually open up R and read in RQDA. Does anybody need time to install RQDA? Did you all, did we need to take a minute to do that, or can we keep moving forward? All right, I assume we're all good to go. Yes? I don't know where my chat went. Oh, there. Okay, great. So yes, we need to install the library for the GUI to pop up. So I'll show you all how that works right now. So I already have RQDA installed in my library. So if you're down here, so I already have RQDA. And to get it to pop up, we just come down to our console and do library, RQDA, and then I hit, and it should start loading the package. If this is the first time you're doing this, it'll ask you to install that GTK plus, and you want to say yes, and then it should pop up. And if you look down here, it's not just going to pop up on your window, but you got to look down here, and then you can pull it and pop up, and it'll look something like this. So do we need any help with that, or do we all see what's going on here? Flag me down in the chat if that didn't come up for you. Okay. Where is my chat? Yes, I will give you a minute to have it pull up. And just remember, it won't just pop up on the screen. You have to kind of look at your taskbar, and it should be up there. It looks like what you can see on my screen. It has the R symbol, and it says RQDA Qualitative. And when it pops up, it looks like this. So I'll give you guys a couple more minutes to get that up and ready. I'm actually not sure on a Mac. I've never used a Mac. Maybe it pops up on the dock. Yes, after installs, you type library RQDA in the console. If it's your first time installing it, it'll ask you, it'll give you a prompt that asks you if you want to install GTK Plus or not. You want to say yes, because the package is dependent on having that installed, and it's going to take just a minute. Do we need a couple more minutes? If you need another minute, let me know in the chat. Is anybody else having installation problems? Is anybody else using a Mac? We will do the old Google. Oops.
helpful.
Yeah, does anybody have a Mac that works? Is everyone who has Macs having problems?
We have a couple questions in the chat asking if anyone's got it to work on a Mac yet.
We have a link for a Mac installation from Ryan. Thanks, Ryan. Yeah. So if you go to the link that Ryan posted, they have an installation for Mac OS X. So there, I think it's asking you to download Xquartz, which I don't know what that is. But then it's having you download the GTK package separately, the GTK Plus package, and then having you run it in R. And I'll keep this up for a minute. So I'll give you all just a couple more minutes to try to install it. And just if you in the chat, if you have it installed, can you just let me know? And we are also recording this, so you can always go back and look and see how to do everything. And also the second part, we're just doing a script in RStudio, so you can still do the tiny text and text mining package. Okay, great. We have some people where it's working. I'm going to go ahead and start going through RQDA just so we can get some explanations, and we are recording this. So if you need to come back and watch later, that's great as well. So just to walk you all through it. So this is RQDA. It's what we call a GUI package. So it's a graphic user interface. And everything is going to be based on highlighting. You can type in text, but we're also going to be doing a lot of buttons and pointing and clicking there for you. So as we get started, so there's two things you can do when you first start. You can open an existing project that you may already have, or you can start a new project. So here I'm going to want to start a new project. So I'm going to start a new project. And you can choose your folder. You can save it in here. If you want to browse for other folders, you can do this as well. But if you have a working directory already set in your RStudio or in R, it's just going to automatically save to that. And that's where I want to save this, because this is where my text articles that we're going to want to look at later are. I do already have one called Qualitative Research in here, but I'm just going to make a new one. And since I'm looking at Uber articles, I got some Uber articles right here. I'm going to call this Qual Uber. But you can call it whatever you want. It's going to save it as an RQDA. That's its own project type. So it'll be .rqda. That'll be save as. So you just go, OK. All right. And so now we have a new project. And then all of these buttons that were grayed out are now open. And some of them are very clear of what they are. Open project, you can just already open an existing project that you have created. Close the project, so that would just close the project we just created. Project memo, so if you have some notes you want to take about your project more broadly, you can hit project memo and you can just type in some notes. So I'm working on this, I got some Uber articles in here, stuff about transportation, and so maybe I just want to say, this is my files, or these are my files, sorry. These are my files about Uber. And I can save the memo. And that's the memo for my project. So I can save that, come back to it. Oh, those are my notes. I think about these memos, because you can do memos for a lot of different things, are just notes about those things that you have within your RQDA project. So this is my notes about my project as a whole that I have, but there's other memos that you can type, as we will see later. But this doesn't really mean anything to your project as a whole. It's just a way that you can keep notes and your own personal notes. You can actually work on project memos with more than one person, which I'll show you one of the things you can do with that. So if me and Janine are working on this project together, I can write Janine a note like, Janine, I already coded these. Thanks. And then I can save the memo. And if she wanted to, when she opens the project, she'll see that memo there. So it's just a way to broadly keep more notes about your project that you have. Okay, and you just close it and it closes. So everything like that in RQDA, or everything is like that in RQDA. You're gonna have like some buttons, and then you're gonna have some sort of like text open window next to you. Save project as is just giving your project a new name. So just like you would save as a Word doc, if you want to save it as something else, you can save it as something else. We'll get into close all codings, clean project, and backup project. Those are some things that you can do later. They make more sense after we kind of get into the nitty gritty and explain some things about RQDA. But that's basically everything up front for RQDA. That's all the stuff that you can do under this project tab. And under the project tab, it's going to be things that you're doing more broadly with RQDA. So the second thing I think is important to look at is when you go all the way down to settings. These are the different settings that you can use to customize your experience with RQDA. And as you notice, like there's some different little places down here that you can like pull tabs and make some choices. But there's actually something up here called click to set font. And then you can change the font that you're working at in your RQDA file. So if you want to have, so here it's sans normal 11. For me, that's fine. That's big enough. Maybe I'll make it a little bigger since we're all working on this together and you're all looking at our screens. But if you have some other font that you prefer, if you prefer Rockwell Condensed, Playbill, whatnot, you can just change the font. And so this font will be, all your text files will be in this font. And so just pick a font. You can leave it as the, excuse me, you can leave it as the default. But if you want to change it to something that's maybe easier for you to read, you can go in here and change it. That's all up to preference. It doesn't really change anything about the outcome of your project. The next thing you see is the name of the coder. So this is if you are working on a project with more than one person. When you sign in and you go to settings, you can assign someone to be working on something, and it can tell you under the code who made that highlight. But if it's just one person, it's not going to do that. If you're not working on a collaborative project with more than one person, you don't really have to even have your name on here. I just have my name, Mary, because it's my name, and so that's there. File encoding, so this is what we think about when we encode files in regular R or any sort of script. You can just leave it as is. I've never had problems using file encoding unknown in RQDA, but just in case you're working with things that are in a different language, you can also change it to UTF-8. So for example, I've had to work with some data sets that were maybe in French or Spanish, and working in UTF-8 encoding will make sure all of your accent marks don't get lost. That's kind of an encoding that you can use for, especially good for like different languages. So you can use that so your accents and your special characters all show up correctly there. But honestly, if you're just working in English, you don't really need to do anything there. It doesn't really change anything. We will come back to some of these other properties after I explain some things, because it's easier when you see them. Just keep in mind for when we're going forward that color for coding is blue, and we'll talk about codes. Color for cases is gold, and you can always change those. I honestly don't ever do anything with a coding table or byte order mark. I actually don't know what byte order mark means, but sometimes you can change a current coding table. If you by any chance want to do two different data sets or two different files for your coding, you can use one and then the other, but I honestly don't do this. I just create a new project. It keeps things from getting lost within your I get confused, and if I don't just separate it by project, then I'll end up getting lost and confused. So I just kind of leave that as my first coding table. Show file properties. So this will give you a pop-up menu to tell you about properties of the files that you have. I can show you this if you guys want, but I honestly never turn it on. I don't need to know the properties of my text files when I'm looking at them. And type of retrieval we'll talk about in a minute when we get to codes and cases and file categories and things like that. So these are your settings. If you don't like the settings that you put in, you can just go back to default and it'll change everything back to the default. Same with font. But if you do change anything, you need to be sure to hit OK so it knows to save those changes. If you just change your name and then hit OK, or if you just change your name and you don't hit OK and then you just go back to the project tab, it's not going to know that you changed that. So you want to be sure to hit OK. And this will all make a little more sense when we start talking about files, but we'll come back to some of these settings when we talk about those. So back to the project. Again, we started a new project. This is what we're doing is we're going to go look at text files in our research. So we can research them and look at them. And so the first thing we want to do before we can code anything or have any file categories is we actually do need some files. And so there's two things you can do with files. You can make a new file and you can just type whatever you want in there. If you have a Word document that has your interview that you had in it, you can just copy it, paste it into this file. If you have a text that you get from a website, like an article, you can just copy it and paste it into your new file. And now I have that text there. And then you have this new file. So you can save to the project and save and close. So this will just save your file to the project and you can continue typing in it. It'll save it and then it'll close out. So if we wanted this one, we can say new document. Just like anything else in R or working with data, we don't really want any spaces, no weird marks. Just keep it kind of plain, all one word. And we hit OK. Oh, come on. I was having problems with this earlier. Okay. Okay, I don't know why that's not showing up. But that should just save there in your files when you save or save to project. I was having a little bit of problems with that earlier, so hopefully we don't have a problem with that when we import our files. The other thing you can do is you can import files for RQDA. So you hit up here, we have all of our buttons, so it's blanked out if you can't do it. You hit import, and so now we can actually import some text files. So RQDA only really works with text files. You can't use PDFs, Word documents. You just want to stick to text files. At least that's what I used, and I know that works. I know it definitely doesn't work with PDFs. But here, just like you upload any file into a program, you can select and hit OK. Oh, there's our new documents. Okay, it took a while to refresh. Well, that gives me a good opportunity to show you this. So you can open it. And so there's our multiple documents. But then you can delete it, right? So you can delete the documents. Yes, I really want to delete that file. I don't know why you didn't show up the first time. Yes, I want to delete that file. Okay, so you can delete it like any other file. Here you can double click to open and see this is our uploaded text file, right? We have our journal article, our Uber Dreams article that we have. And then we can close it. You can rename it. So if I didn't like that name, so if that name of my file doesn't make any sense, you can rename it, especially for this new document. ND doesn't really tell me anything. And so I could say new name or random document or test document, and then hit OK. and I'll just rename it. But something else you can do with our different articles and our different text is you can actually make a memo for your own files. So let's say you're doing an interview, and I did this interview, and maybe my phone kept ringing, or something weird happened during the interview and I want to make note of it. Maybe we were at a coffee shop and a car crash happened while I was at the coffee shop interviewing. You can have your own memo, and you can make a memo about the interview. You know, like, interview was good. This isn't actually an interview, it's an article, but we'll just say this interview is good. And then you can save that memo. That doesn't change anything about the document. That just gives it a memo if you want to take notes about that specific file. And so if you open memo, it shows up again. So this interview is good. And if you want to change, there's no way to delete memos. You would just have to delete the text that's in there. And we can save that memo and turn it into a blank memo. So now I'm actually going to import the rest of my files, all 4 of the articles, if you want to do the same. Okay. So I have all my files in there. I actually don't think I want this text document anymore. It doesn't have anything to do with what I'm doing, so I can delete that. So now I have all of my files. So this is your text files of your interviews, your newspaper articles, your journal articles. These are newspaper articles, for example. And so now we can start doing different things with our files and start coding them as well. So the first thing we want to go, next thing we want to go down to is codes. And we want to create our own code. We want to add something that says something about our interview, or what we're trying to research, or what we're trying to do. So this is obviously all articles about Uber. I think they're from St. Louis from 2015. So maybe I want to look at sentences every time Uber is mentioned. So I do a new code, Uber, and I hit OK. So now I have my Uber code. And the way RQDA works is when you click something and it's highlighted, it means I'm working with that specific line. So for example, I have my Uber. I go to files. Okay, and now I have this new file up. And I want to find where it talks about Uber. Oh, so the first sentence. Okay. So Uber is bringing new ride option to St. Louis on Friday. So I have that. Uber. Oh, come on. Sorry. I'm trying to remember how I did this. Oh, sorry. I'm thinking of something else. You go to add, or no, not add, sorry. There we go. Sorry. I couldn't remember the order I did it. Okay. So you have your file open. And what we can do is we can open our file and we have it open, and we want to know when we talk about Uber. So we highlighted this. Well, we actually didn't highlight the first sentence. We actually highlighted the first 2 sentences, which we can know how to fix that when we're done. So you use this mark button to mark that specific sentence. So now I know that this sentence that I highlighted has something to do with Uber. It is a way I'm coding it to know that that's something that can be flagged for something when I'm organizing my data. And you could do the same thing with trying to back up and maybe unmark it. So let's say I messed up and this sentence wasn't really about Uber. The last couple of hours at least doesn't really have Uber in the sentence. So I can click anywhere on these 2 lines where it is blue, and hit unmark. And then it takes the marking away. So now I can just go back to highlighting my Uber sentence, go back to Uber, hit mark, and now just my first sentence is marked by my Uber code. And as you notice, that is blue. And if you went back into our settings, our coding color for coding, our color for coding is blue. And of course, we can change this, right? If we want it to be maybe burly wood, I don't know what that is. Okay, that would change it to a different color. Or if we wanted it to be any number of other colors, I usually stick with the default. Blue is fine with me. But in case you wanted to change the color coding of your text, you can do that as well. So if that blue is hard for you to tell the difference between the black text and the blue text, you can change that color. So let's go maybe and try to do a couple more Uber sentences. So I don't, so like maybe that's one here. Here's a quote about that from the Uber's partners in the program. So I'm going to say that that's pretty Uber-centric, and maybe do that for a couple more of my files. Maybe find some other times when we say Uber. To recruit 200 in St. Louis area, like that sounds pretty Uber, and we can mark that. Okay, so we have some highlighted text of our articles that we're using, and we know these specific sentences or these paragraphs or these group of text have to do with that specific word. And you could do any number of words or whatever is important to you. This is good if you have multiple topics for more than one area, and you can use this 2 different codes on one line. So if I think this also has to do with drivers, if I wanted to make a new coding, if I wanted to make a new coding, add one and do drivers. Okay, and then I have a drivers coding and I highlight the same sentence, drivers, mark. Now it has both drivers and Uber flag, that it's not just drivers, or that's not just Uber. So you can do more than one to more than one line if that's better for you. So you're probably thinking, how did I use this? What's the point of this? So I did newspaper articles and interviews over the course of from 2011 to 2018, and I had different articles for each. And so I wanted to encapsulate the chronological order that things happen in a policy process for Uber and Lyft in cities. So for St. Louis, for example, these are all from 2015. And I wanted to find every instance I thought was important about Uber in these different articles. So, I'd do this and I would say that sentence is important and I would mark it. And I would go through and do that with Uber, Lyft, taxis, these different things. So when I come over here and I want to just look at anything that has to do with Uber, I can go to coding and it shows every instance that I used my mark for coding for Uber. So this is all of the, well, in this example, this is all of the 2015 points I made about, all the highlights I made about Uber in 2015. And so it tells me the source. This tells me it's from my article 1. These 2 are from article 2. These are the characters. So this is from the, 0. So this is from the start of the document all the way to the 58th character. If that's something that is important to you in your work. And then you can go, and that's going to combine it for all of the different documents. So here's article 1, article 1, article 2, article 2. So if you had to go and highlight a bunch of things, a bunch of documents and a bunch of interviews, and they want to do it with, and you want to do it with specific code, then you can go and just retrieve it. So there's also a way too, after you have that, so now I have all the Uber articles that are important to me, I have all the text that's important to me, you can export this coding as an HTML. So we can name this, whatever it is. So these are Uber 2015 articles. Again, that's going to be saved in the same file. If you set your working directory before that, that's where they're going to be saved. But you can always browse and choose your own folder like you would do a lot of other programs, and you hit OK. and you can decide, I just want the Uber values in there. You can add more than one value. So if I had Uber and Lyft and I wanted Uber and Lyft for 2015 altogether, I could do that as well. And then you hit OK. And then I don't remember if it automatically opens up for you, but we can come in here. Here's my Uber 2015. And I open that, and there's all of my codings. So now I have a file I can share if I'm working with more than one person. And it was created by RQDA. It gives me the date and the time. It gives me the subject matter, which is my Uber. And I have 4 codes from 2 files for my Uber files. And so that's one way. If I did that for a whole entire year, I don't have to go through and sift through all those articles, highlight them by hand, and go through and pull all the quotes I need. I can just highlight them, get this document, and these are all the important things I need from that document. I'm going to pause for a second and ask if we have any questions so far from the chat.
Or if you want to unmute your microphone, if you have a question you want to ask aloud, that's great too.
Yes. I don't know if and also if I'm moving a little too fast, let me know as well, because I'm trying to get through so we can maybe jump into our text mining and tidy text as well. Yeah, so I just did, someone asked if I run the codes for each company. So I just did Uber, Lyft. Some cities had sidecar, so I did some for that. And it kind of depended on what was happening too. So like for my interviews, some people just replaced Uber to mean all of them and just never meant Lyft. So sometimes I just used Uber. So yeah, it just depends. It's kind of a pain in the butt in the rear because it doesn't take PDFs, so you kind of have to go and highlight and copy and paste. But it makes like going back and reporting, it makes that a lot easier. So yeah, you can do it for any number of categories. But the other thing too is if you have different types, you can actually do code categories. So if I wanted to, so let's say I have drivers, Uber, taxis, and then Lyft. So I have all of those different codes. I can actually make a code category. So I can add, so Uber and Lyft are legally called transportation network companies. So I can say TNC and do OK. And so that's my TNC. And you can do the same thing, like you can rename it. You can do a memo. So if I needed to make a memo about my TNC research, and you could do add to, and then I can do Uber, Lyft. Okay. And now those are in the same category. So if you had those where you code more than one thing, like more than one company, and it's all related to the same topic, then you can make your own code categories as well. And that's another way to organize it. Yeah. Okay. Yes. I think I'm just going to talk about a couple more things because this is the main way I have used it, was to do that as a very organizational tool to highlight things and make sure I have it all in one place and make a document from it. So like I said, you can actually make code categories. So you can have different categories of different codes of different things, but have it in the same category. So if I go back to my files, I don't know if any of these actually say anything about Lyft, but I'll just like pick a sentence. Sure, this sentence looks good. Codes, and we do Lyft, mark. So now this is something to do with Lyft. Oh, it turned pink. That time it's pink. That's nice because Lyft is pink. That's organizational. So I have that and go back to code categories, and I can go to TNCs. Again, if you double click, it's going to give you a memo. But you can actually, so codings of selected category here. And now I have my stuff from Lyft, Uber, and everything from both of those categories, right? Because I pulled it doesn't differentiate between the two, but it's using that whole category to pull it into one file. So you can use code categories that way to get everything of more than one type of code into one file if it's your different code categories. Yeah, if you're doing that. Journals is kind of like a memo down here. This is something I didn't use very much, but I guess I'll point it out. If you want to make a journal note, maybe you have a certain experience one day, be like, I found a lot of articles today. You can do save journal if that doesn't pull down. And it'll actually save you. The different than a memo is it's going to give you a date and time. So if you have specific things you do certain days, maybe if you want to put when you accessed because I know some citations you need to put the dates that you access those certain articles, or you want to write other than a memo, you can maybe write about your experience in interview, maybe had more than one interview in a day and they're two separate files, but you want to talk about that day's experience doing the interviews and your ethnography experience, you can write it in a journal. That's just another tool, a note-taking tool that is in RQDA. RQDA does note-taking tools very well. Yeah, so there's that. And I think, so I won't talk, and file categories is the same thing as you can, instead of categorizing your codes, like I did here, you can categorize your types of files. So if I want to say articles, okay, go to my articles, add to, well, these are all articles, so I would add all of them to this. But if I had like interviews and articles in one project, excuse me, interviews and articles in one project, you could pull them all into different categories. So that's just like another way to organize it. And it's going to use like that hierarchical system in RQDA where you have file categories and code categories, and then you can separate everything down out below them. Just pretty quickly, just because I want us to have some time to have a break as well. I won't get into attributes. Attributes is kind of a more advanced way to use RQDA, and I actually haven't ever used it. I feel like it's a little advanced for the kind of stuff I do in qualitative research in RQDA. So I've never actually used it. So I can't really say too much about it as something you do in RQDA. But if you're interested in it, I suggest that you maybe do some further learning about it. So, and then there's so the last thing we're gonna talk about is cases. And cases is just another way to categorize things. So let's say you have an interview and you interviewed, maybe you have different case studies. So maybe I have a bunch of articles and interviews in this one project and they're from all different cities. So you can add, maybe these are all from St. Louis. And these are my, oh, I don't want to put a space. I am violating my own rules. Okay. And then you hit okay. And then now you have a different case. And you could add some, I believe you add some files to that. Let's see. I'm trying to remember if I ever even used cases. I believe you add files to it. Maybe that's under settings. No. Yes, add files. Add to case. There we go. St. Louis. Okay. And so now this is part of my St. Louis case file. And it's just another way to categorize things. So like while file categories are going to be like types of files, codes are going to be the lines you're using for your code. And cases are going to be those types of cases. So this is going to be St. Louis. But let's say I want to say St. Louis news. I don't really need to do that, right? That's not really necessary because I can say St. Louis for my case. I can say St. Louis for my case, but then I can use news as my file category that can be separate from my interview. So they're just all different ways that you can categorize and code, because when you use those, you can retrieve those files back to settings based on those things. So I want to retrieve based on case or file categories or even both when you have some different types of retrieval. Most of the time, I will just go to this great thing and export code as HTML and get all my lift code into an HTML file. And that's normally how I run it. But that is how I use RQDA. And of course, some of the things you could do that might be helpful. You can't really go back in RQDA if you're typing. There's no like back button like you have in the Word document to maybe fix something you did. So some of the one thing you could do is back up your project. And it should say succeed. And if you go into your file, there should be, see right here, we have a backup. It gives me the date and I guess a serial number of some kind. This is my Qualitative Uber, my RQDA backup. And so now I have a specific backup of that time in which I saved it. And so this is an easy way if you're doing a lot of research to back up your project, and make sure it is saved. The last thing I want to talk about is close all your codings. So let's say I have a bunch of things open. So let's say we're all like modern people and we have a million tabs open. And you don't want to sit there and click through all of them. Maybe you have like 15 open. You can do close all codings and that'll close all your windows. So that's just an easy way to clean up your project in RQDA. I think since it's a little after 7, maybe we should stop and take maybe like a 10-minute break and get into the tidy text and the text mining part of the session. Does anybody have any questions so far about RQDA and how to use it or how I used it? So if you do, just let me know in the chat, and I will sit here and I will wait if you all want to take a little bit of a break, maybe around 7:15, or sorry, yeah, 7:15 or 7:17. I'll start the other part of the presentation. Does that sound good?
Sounds great. I think the second half of the presentation is the our markdown file that was in the folder of stuff. So if you want to open that up, that'll probably be what Mary's doing next.
Yes, that will be. That looks like this. I'll share that so you know what it looks like. So I thought I would speak to them via the microphone. If you want me to type the answers in, I'm more than happy to do that, but I'm just going to do it this way. So if you ask me a question and you didn't quite get an answer, or you want me to write it down, please let me know. Someone asked if the marked passages get turned into a paper. No, you can export them like that HTML file, and it's going to take the different chunks of your highlighted text and put them in some ordered fashion in the HTML. So let me pull that back up again. And so it's just going to come out in something like this. So it'll be all your sentences, and it'll tell you the characters and the articles or text that it's going to come from, and gives you a summary at the top. It's not going to come out like you would see a paper. I don't think you can export it as like a Word document or anything like that. It's just going to come out like this. What I find that useful for is if you're working with a lot of data that you maybe have to read all the way through. So let's say you're working on a dissertation or some large research project, and you have to read maybe let's say 30 scholarly articles. You can copy and paste them and highlight them. And those are the important parts that you care about, and then export this HTML file, and then you have all of those different highlighted parts in one spot, and you don't have to dig through those texts or anything. And of course, you can print this if it's easier for you to view. That's just one way in which I used it as a tool, but it's not going to pull it out and make it like a paper in some way. I wouldn't recommend writing a paper using RQDA text, but I mean, to each their own. If you want to use that, it'll still come out just like an HTML file. Let me find the second question that was asked. Someone asked if I would recommend RQDA for a large data sample, so like 1,000 survey responses. I think that just depends on what you want to do with the data. If you're just looking for mentions of certain words, I would definitely stay tuned for the text mining and tidy text sample. But if you're looking for some more contextualized, like a qualitative survey where people filled out context pretty deeply and you want that detail, I think using RQDA works really well. But if you just want to find specific words, like I took 1,000 surveys, they were all open answer, and I want to see how many times the word Uber pops up, then maybe tidy text is more for you. I use tidy text in this way for looking at word proximity, which we will talk about starting right now. But I think that's really just up to your research project. I think RQDA is really, I think I have used RQDA and find RQDA most helpful for organizing things that you need highlighted. So like a bunch of journal articles for maybe a specific research project, or it's really good for interview data. So I would say if those surveys were interview data, it's a really good way to pull the most important parts that you care about out of it. But it really depends on your research project and what you're trying to accomplish. So I hope that answers your questions. If that didn't, please let me know and I can type something out or go into further detail if you have any further questions. I do want us to get started on the second part, which is the tidy text. This should be a lot easier for everyone because it's just in our Markdown file. And so I don't know if any of you have worked in R Markdown, but this is how you make dynamic documents in R. But there is R code embedded in it. And so I'm just going to go through some of the R code for using tidy text mining, or for text mining and tidy text in R. So first of all, some of the packages I use for this. Knitter is a package for R Markdown. This line 15 is going to be setting your working directory for the entire R Markdown file. So for me, all of my articles are in this articles folder. They're all PDF files. If I click it, we can see them all. I can see them all there in RStudio. So for me, I'm going to want to set that working directory. Again, I can go up here, choose working directory and set that. But if I run this R Markdown chunk, it'll set it for my entire R Markdown file going forward. So the 6 or 7 tools I use for this example. So I use PDF tools that is used for extracting text from PDFs. So like I said before, when using RQDA, it doesn't do PDFs, but luckily for us, our studio will read and extract text from PDFs, and we use that through the PDF tools package. I will say ahead of time, I've only ever done tidy text and text mining with PDFs. I've never done it with text data. I've only done it with PDFs. So I know there might be difference in coding if you're using like a .txt file or a .docx, so like Word document. So just keep that in mind when you see some of the coding, that this is very specific for PDFs. I also find this probably the most useful for PDFs since that's usually the format that we get a lot of good text documents. The TM stands for text mining. So that's the text mining package, which we will use to find text. Our tidyverse is the one that holds our ggplot2 and some of those other dependencies that are important for doing data management and visualizing data. So I use that in there. I actually don't think I use word cloud in this example, but I wanted to put it in there to know that there is a word cloud package if you want to make a word cloud with text. So if you've never seen a word cloud, it's basically just, it'll show words in a pretty pattern. Some will be horizontal, some will be vertical. And the bigger words will be the words that occur most often, and the smaller words are the words that occur less often. So there's something in there that'll make a word cloud for you in R. Then we have tidy text, which makes what we call tidy data frames and helps us, those data frames helps us look for proximity, those specific data frames. Magritter is for using pipes. You don't have to use pipes. I use pipes frequently because they help keep data nice and clean. And then I use fuzzy join for joining text. So those are all the packages I use. So if you want to follow along and do this on your own, I would go ahead and run this chunk. Well, yeah, okay. Restart R. No. No. There we go. So we're installing some of these packages. This shouldn't take very long if you don't have these packages installed. It'll just take a minute. So we'll let those packages run and let the libraries read those in. So that's running and that's good. Making sure that I actually have that on this computer. And just remember, when you're in R, red doesn't necessarily mean bad. It just means a warning. It's just telling me things about the package. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's an error. And it's something to keep in mind when you're using R, because sometimes it can be scary when you get the red text and you think you're making an error, but you aren't. It's just telling me that fuzzy join was built in this version of R. Okay. And so if we scroll down a little further, again, we set our working directory. We set it up here, but I just wanted to put this in case you're not working in an R Markdown file and you just kind of want to copy and paste over what we're doing. But if you set your working directory up here, it'll still be set down here. So you can rerun that if you want, but our working directory is already set up here and it'll tell us that. But that's just so we have some process on how we do this. So the first thing we're doing is we're setting our working directory where all of our files in. We can do this manually via the sessions tab, start working directory, choose working directory, or we can use that set working directory command. I set my working directory where these PDF files are. So we should be all good with that. And you can come over here. I'm just going to double check. Okay, make sure I have it actually set there. All right. And then the first thing we want to do is we actually want to create a vector of our documents. So this is actually going to list all of our documents that we were wanting to look at. I just want to say for, oh, this is not in the right working directory. Sorry, let me make sure it's in the right working directory. No. Sorry, my R just booted me off. Sorry about that. Let's see. Other RQDA. Oh, did I just miss something? All right. Sorry about all of that. No. Okay. Then install the libraries. Sorry about that. R pooped out on me. So we set our working directory. Okay. And then, sorry about that. We want to start listing our PDF files. Okay, and if we go up here, we can see that in our global environment, it's just listing the name of all of our PDF files that we're using. So this is our, do women know different stuff than men? It's a politics one, social pressure and voter turnout, and then we have robust action about Medicaid. Those are some different files that we have, and it's going to list them all here in the PDFs. I just want to tell you one thing, under this list files, you can leave it blank and it will list every file in that folder. So if you have nothing else in that folder, you're probably safe to just do that. But also you can use this to tell it the type. I just want to warn you all that PDF like this is different from PDF like this. Capitalization matters. And I know that sometimes when PDF files are saved, they're saved as .pdf all lowercase, and sometimes they're saved as .pdf all uppercase. I learned this the hard way, that those are two separate things, and R will treat those files as two separate files. So if you just want PDFs and they're saved as lowercase, you type equals PDF. If there's nothing else in your folder but the documents you're interested in, you don't really need to put anything in your list files. So here we can see it's just a list of 1 to 3. It's our 3 character files. Those are our 3 files. And those are in a vector. And our Markdown is going to give us the output here as well. So this will list all your documents. And like I said, be sure to call the type of documents you want. And just make sure that there's a difference between PDF and PDF. PDF big and PDF small. The next thing we want to do is create what's called a corpus file. So this is used to create a corpus document, which is a URI source. It's tell us that it's a uniform source identifier, and that the vector's names are that source. The source is going to be those articles. So we're just making this corpus from our articles, and that's what that line is telling us right here. The reader control is telling us that telling the corpus which reader to use. And here we're using PDFs. So if you were using text files, this code would be different. If you were using a Word doc files, this code would be different. So we're using this to create a corpus. But some of these things might be different depending on if you're not calling your file or if you're not calling your values up here articles, that would be different. If you're not using PDFs, that would be different. The case here is not the same as the upper and lower case up here, because this is actually like an R command. So we want to make sure that it's uppercase. And so we highlight that code and we run those selected lines. All right, and now we have our list of 3. And we have our corpus here with our list of 3 documents in them, right? So there is our corpus. So we're pretty happy about that. You might get some warnings about what it couldn't read a character or something. most of the time that's like a colon wasn't read right. So I just kind of ignore those most of the time. I've never had problems with that. So our corpus is our database for text. So now we created this corpus. We have this database for text. And so that's what we have over here with our ATC. So that's my article text corpus. So we created that over there. The next thing we want to do is create a term document matrix, the TDM. So it stores counts of terms. So this will tell us how many times something, a term, a word appears in our document. So this is good if you really want to know volume of words and how many times they appear in things you're trying to study, or so on and so forth. So here, what I'm telling it is I want to turn this, this corpus into a term document matrix. And these are some of the things I want to control for. These are some of the things I want to change about when I'm pulling those terms from these documents. So the first thing is I'm telling it to remove punctuation equals true. So I'm getting rid of periods, colons, semicolons, exclamation points, all of the commas, all of those things I'm pulling from the text. I'm not really interested how many times there's a period in my document. If you are, leave it in there. But I'm really not interested in that. So I want to pull those from the database so I don't have those in there. I also wanted to pull stop words. I'm really not interested in the word the, of, and, etc. So I want to get rid of stop words because I know if I have those words, those are the ones that are going to appear the most, right? We're going to see tons of thes and ands and ofs. So I just want to get rid of those altogether because that's really going to mess up my count of words. To lower means it converts all of my letters to lowercase. So this is just a way to make your words more systematic. So I don't have a bunch of uppercase and lowercase words because we know with R that it will treat upper and lowercase as different words and treat them differently. So we want to make them all the same case so we don't maybe count the same word as different words. Then we have a stemming, which is true. So this turns words into looks for stem words and turns them into their stem words. So if I had running, it'll make it just run. It'll get rid of the ing. If I had wanted, like W-A-N-T-E-D, it gets rid of the ed and just leaves want. That might be something you want to do, something you might not want to do. It just depends on your particular project. I just tend to remove those stemmed words. If you want to keep them in, like if you're talking about past versus present tense when you're looking at your words, then it might be useful to leave those in. For me, I tend to take them out, so I remove the stem words. And the last thing is remove numbers. I just don't want a database with numbers in it. I'm not really concerned with numbers for these particular data sets. I know that the articles I have are academic articles, and there's just going to be numbers everywhere. There's going to be numbers that are footnotes, and I just don't want them in that in my data set. So that's what that's telling me to do. Now, there's tons of different commands out there. So you can do none of these. You can do all of these, and there's more out there. These are just the 5 that I use and probably use the most, just depending on what particular thing I'm doing with that project. All right, and so the next thing we do is we're gonna run that. If I remember correctly, I think this takes a second. No, I'm incorrect. That did not take very long. So now I have a list, right? And so I have a list of integers. These are all of my words. These are my dimensions. Those are all in there. So this is a text document matrix. So then we can look at or inspect it, right? Right. So now we have it stored. So now I can see that family, which I'm assumed as families, occurs twice in my one document, 5 times in the next, 191 in my third article. Knowledge is the next word that I can see. I have 144 in the first one, but only 2 and 1 in the next 2. So I see that I start looking at terms. These aren't necessarily the ones that recur the most. These are just at the top of the terms for my data set. So you can use this inspect to start looking at your different numbers. And now maybe we want to look at frequent terms, which ones occur the most. We can use, this is the inspect command. Now we can use frequent terms. So I'm telling it, I want to use my text document matrix. The low frequency, I don't really care about words that occur less than 100 times. I really want to look at words that occur a lot. And I'm just telling them the highest cap for my frequency is infinity. I go as high as you want to go when I look at these frequency terms. And so I can run that. And now I can see that my most frequent words are content, differ, elite, which is, I assume, elite, elites, or something like that. Family, families, marriage, which is probably medicine, men, network, new, oligarch is in there. So there, you could just see all, this is just like a snapshot of all the words that are most frequent within our text, right, from those 3 articles. So that's giving us some idea. Right. If you have any questions, be sure to put them in the chat. If I'm moving too fast, please let me know, but I figure I can keep going. So now we want to make a matrix of our terms. So this is, as you can see over here, it's kind of, it has this funky list thing going on where we can look at the frequency and things like that, but we can't really look at it in like a data set. So we want to turn that into a matrix. So this is as matrix, and I'm wanting to use it with the text document matrix. And I'm really curious in what about the frequency. So we're going to run that. And so this is our matrix. So now we have the terms, and these are all the frequencies of our matrix. So if we go over here, now we even have this. So these are our most frequent terms, right? Because we call that ATC frequent. I'm really only interested in the most frequent terms. That's what I meant to say. Sorry about that. So here I have my 3 articles. These are the ones that occur the most, and these are all the words and the stem words for those. So now I have a data set of all of my text, or of my text of the words that occur the most in my 3 articles that I'm interested in. So if I want to, now those are kind of like out of order, and we don't really know what's going on because they're all different articles, and maybe we need to combine them. So here we can sort our text. So now I can see, so this is an Apply application, so I'm telling it to sort it by the combined addition, to sum all of the different columns and give me one number, and I want that from most to decreasing. And so I'm sorting the text. That's what my sort text command is over here. So here I can see that politics, policy, or politics, politic, political occurs the most, right? That makes sense. These are 3 political science articles. That doesn't really surprise me. Followed by which is probably medicine, medicines, family, vote, social, oligarchs in there, marriage. And so I'm really seeing which words occur the most, right? So this is a matrix. And so now I want to maybe make it a data frame so I can start maybe messing with the data and coming up with something new and really observing it. So here I'm just creating as a data frame. I'm just making it a data frame. See how it has like a little different of a table style. Instead, it's not just a matrix, it's actually a data frame with 18 observations and 1 variable. And I did that with my sorted text. So that's the combined of all my 3 articles, not just my article separately, right? So this is my little data set I have. It's very little. It has 18 observations and 2 columns. So, and 1 variable. These are just the observations of the variable. Yes, so we can do that as well. We can clean up the data a little bit, clean up the table. So here I'm just, what I'm doing is I'm giving this a label. I'm calling this word. I'm calling this count. I'm giving the row names, and then I'm giving the columns names, right? So now I have a new data frame here with some labels, some nice labels. Because if you see before, we have sort text and then nothing's labeled over here. That's what I'm doing down here is I'm just cleaning up the table and making it prettier. That's what we're doing down here. And now something else we can do is we can actually graph our words. This is where ggplot comes in. So what I'm telling it to do here is I'm telling it to graph my data frame, and I want to graph word by count of the word. I'm using geom count because we're doing counts. I don't want to include a legend, so this is telling me the legend position equals none, which means I don't want a legend. This is telling me to angle my x-axis terms. So as we can see down here, they're set at an angle. If you have them flat, the words are going to run into each other, and it just doesn't look nice. We give it a title. We label the variables. So we're going to do word. Oh, I mixed up word and count. So y should be count. I apologize about that. X should be word. All right. And then I just made the plot title in the middle. That's what this is telling me is that please make my plot title center. Otherwise in R, it'll put it like over here. And so if we highlight that and run that. All right, now those are in the right place. Now I have a nice little graph of all of my frequently occurring words. So you can, there are not any, you can change this to be in ascending order if you want. There is a command for that. I don't remember it off the top of my head. But here we can just definitely visually see the count of all of our words. That kind of looks a little better than our table. And it's just kind of nice to have a graph. So I'm going to get into word proximity here in just a minute. So if you have any questions, please throw them up in the chat. I hope you all are following along and understanding this particular part of text of qualitative analysis in R. So here, so that was just, oops. All right. So that was just trying to get a count of our data. And make a graph of it, right? So if that's all you want to do, that's great. Now you have this graph of like all of these most occurring words in all of your PDF files. But there's actually something else that I think is useful that I've done before. And so like, what if we're interested in proximity? So let's say that we want to know how often words appear next to one word. So how often does something appear close to the word fire or close to the word politics or close to the word sociology or whatever. So let's say we want to see how close some of the political words appear next to women. So we're going to define some political words, and I really want to know how often we're talking about those words around the word women. So how much we're talking about women and politics. So we want to choose some words we're interested in. So some of the words I'm interested in is voting, knowledge, political, politics, demonstrate. So if you're like demonstrating, protesting, Congress, senators, participation. So all I'm doing here is just making a vector of words, right? I'm just trying to list some words that I think are important and I'm putting into a list and we're going to use that later, right? And then we want to go back to our corpus because we're wanting to do something different. When we're wanting to look at proximity, we're wanting to turn our text into a tiny data frame. It's just a different type of data frame that's for working with text. I don't know how to describe, nor do I really know the differences and intricacies of how it's different from an actual data frame. I just know you need the specific type of data frame. Otherwise, these working with words and trying to find proximities just aren't going to work. So we're going to try to turn this into a tidy data frame. Maybe this is the thing that takes a minute to do. Something on here will run and it takes a second. Nope, that didn't take long at all. So now I have a tidy data frame. It's giving me some different variables, the language it's in. It's telling me it's in English. It's telling me it's in an Adobe document. It's giving me the entire text here. That's all one variable. The ID is just the file that's there. It doesn't have an author or description, but it's giving me a timestamp That's pretty cool. There's all of these different, and the heading, what its actual title is. So there's all of these different headings that are going into our tidy text document. So the first thing we want to do with tidy text is we want to do what is called tokenizing. And that just means taking a word or a set of words and putting that to be one row in the data frame. So you're basically taking all your text and moving it to having different rows and setting it all just being one long line of text. So here I want to get rid of some. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to call this word data. That's going to be my object type. And then we have our tidy data set right here. And what I do is pipe it. This is what piping is. And basically telling everything that's following that, I want to come from this particular object, which is our tiny data frame up here. So this line right here is, I'm just trying to get rid of some of these columns I really don't care about. Author is empty. Data timestamp, I don't care about. Description is empty. I don't care about it. I know they're all in English. The heading is not really important. The ID is not important. I'm just trying to get rid of some of these columns. This next unset token command is used to break up the text into individual cases and output a column as a word. So what I'm telling it is I want you to take the text and unnest the tokens where each word is its own row. And then what this mutate is telling me that it gives me a position for all of our words so we know how they're in relation with each other. So it's giving it a variable that shows that, like, I'm 1 away from this other word, I'm 2 away from this other word. So it's giving us that. And also here, if it's in stop words that are in English, I'm telling them all the English stop words, so the, and, with, of. Just don't put them in my data set. I'm not really interested in it. So we'll see what that looks like here in a second after we run it. So let's go ahead and run this. All right, and so now we can see that, like, there's 29,227 rows. We have a lot of words in our documents, and then we have some position numbers there as well. So now we can get some nearby words by doing this. So this is telling me that, like, woman's the second word, men is this fourth word. Remember, we got rid of stop words. It probably says men and women, but and isn't in there. But it takes it out, but it doesn't say that there isn't an and there. So that's kind of useful to know when you're working with this data set. So now we can get nearby words. So let's say we're interested in those words that we listed before, that V's values, so that voting, knowledge, politics, and whatnot, are close to women. And let's say the theory tells us that we want to see those words within 5 word positions of women. So we're going to start looking at word proximity. So I'm going to call this new data frame, this new object, women prox, WOM prox, and I'm wanting to use my word data, which is the data up here that I cleaned up. So this is the prox filter. Word equals women is the proximity word that we are interested in. This is where you would put it. So women is the word we're interested in. Here we're focused on word and the relative word position. That's what all of that code means, is that I want you to focus on words and I want you to focus on the position of the word. So we're just calling those 2 columns. That probably is more useful that's also useful to use if you kept all of those other variables within your data set as well. And what this one is telling you is we want a max distance of 5. So you're joining the word data by the focus position, but you're joining each word, but if it's more than 5 words away, then we're not really interested in it. And that's what both of these lines are telling you to do. So this is the one I was talking about. This will take a minute if you run this. So we will run this and I will look at the chat. All right, and we got our little stop sign. It's going to take us a minute. I'm going to come over here in the chat with everyone and say hello. Hello in the chat. Are we all following along? Awesome. Great. Yes. Wonderful. We're still going, so this does take an actual minute. So if you have any questions and you want to put it in the chat, now is a great time to ask a question. I'm going to keep an eye on that for just a minute. So if you have, so some of the things I had to do, I've done this before, where I've had over 100 PDFs. And I would have to put this on my desktop, which is my office is in my basement, and have it sit there and run. I'll start it before I go to work, and then come home from work, and hopefully it will have been done. So that does take a while. So how you can see now, it's just done. I don't know if anybody timed that, but it took about a minute, maybe a minute and a half. That's only with 3 documents. So just keep in mind that it will take a while if you run this with a lot of documents. So the next thing we want to do, then we kind of want to regroup our words, because this data set is kind of all over the place. So we're going to use this word proximity group is my new object. I'm going to use this WOMProx that I just created up here that took about a minute and a half. I'm going to group by word, summarize the number, and then I have some max min distance commands. Average distance, I want the maximum distance, I want to call that the max distance. That's going to give me my max distance variable. Minimum distance, that is going to give me my minimum distance, and then average distance is the mean. And I want to arrange it by descending number. So I do this and I run that and get my WOMProx group. Great. So now woman is the most occurring word closest to woman. And then it's men, and then knowledge, and I see political and gender, information, relevant, Congress. There's some good words in there. And remember, I didn't stem the words in this particular example. You can stem the words. Just like you did before, you could do the remove numbers things, whatever you need to do, but I didn't do that specifically here. So now we're going to want to use this filter word in V. So remember, our V over here is our character. So now we can get those words from that specific data. So now we have knowledge, political, senators, politics, participation, voting are all in there. Yes, so the min distance, the minimum distance is right here. It's minimum distance and it's min equals distance. So that's one of our variables right here. So we can see that women appear 0 closest to women. That makes sense. Max distance is 5. That also makes sense because we only wanted to do within 5 words of that proximity. Yes, so now here we parse out our words. We use our WOMProx group that we made up here and have our woman politics. And now I have my woman politics object. It's this new data frame that I have. And then I want to graph it. So this is a graph I made for this. Let me go ahead and run it with my women's politics words. So I have 7 words. So here I'm telling it I want a ggplot. I want to use my women politics data frame that I just made. I want R to be I want it to reorder from word, but I want it from most to least. So I do negative number, Y equals number, and I want to fill it with the average distance. So my granulated color here is the average distance. So maybe something occurs the most. So like senators appears the 4th most out of all my proximity words, but its average distance is a lot smaller. So we're probably talking about women senators a lot in these articles. And so then I want to make that geom bar. And so like I did that, and I want to set the stat to identity. And then my labels, fill is average distance. That's the legend label is average distance. Title, I wanted to leave the Y and the X axis titles blank. I think they might make the graph messy, so I got rid of them. My title is word proximity to women. And then I centered that title. And here again, I turned the words at a 45-degree angle. And I changed my Y limit, so it's just something nice and neat. Just 0 to 30. Tell me about 0 to 30, the proximity words for women. So when we look at this chart, we see that knowledge appears the most of our political words, not of all the words, because remember, we parsed out those words, appears the most with women. And it falls around average distance on our 0 to 5 scale. The next is political, but that seems to have a wider dispersion of distance. And then Congress, senators, which has a low dispersion of distance, politics, participation, and then voting. Voting is our last word that shows up in proximity to women. So now if you have this document, you can actually knit it to make it an HTML file. Oh, sorry, I forgot to like save this. I need to open my tidy again because I moved it. Sorry, just a second. There it is. All right. Okay. Yes. Okay, let me see if I can get this to knit. Nope, apparently I'm not going to get this to knit. But we can figure that out later. As long as you all have the code in the markdown file and you saw how to make the graph and make the graphs, I hope you understand everything and we're actually coming up on the end. You can still knit with install packages in there. Oh, okay.
Yeah, if you take out all those install packages, it should knit just like you tried it earlier. So if you can comment them out if you highlight them and hit Control-Shift-C.
Okay, let me do that.
Comment them all out.
Oh, nice. Okay, let me see.
You got one still there that's not commented.
Thanks to you. Thank you for your eyes.
Sure.
Yeah, I just want to see. This might take a minute to run because remember that Corpus file takes a while for it to run through. So, or maybe not, maybe since it's already done it, it'll just knit it and it'll be quick. So yeah, so now I made this like pretty R Markdown file, just a little taste if you've never done R Markdown before. Now I have this great document that tells you how to make a R Markdown file. So that's great. Yay. I don't know why the words aren't showing up, but all right. I think that's it. I think that's all I had to show you. It's almost 8 o'clock now. Does anybody have any last minute questions they want to ask me? Does tidy text and text mining make sense? I try to be really detailed in my notes in the R script. And I'm sorry that it can't do notes and things like that for RQDA because it's a GUI application, but I hope this all helps you at least start any qualitative research or any text mining that you may want to do in RStudio. So, yes. So, if anybody has any last questions they want to ask, now would be the time. We only have a couple minutes left. Or if Janine, if you have any last things to say about Our Ladies, I hope you all thought this was good. This is my first time ever doing this. This is the first time Our Ladies has done a virtual workshop. Maybe next time GUI applications won't be the best thing to do. I'm sorry about RQDA. It is a finicky application. But we're trying and learning, so.
Yeah, I want to thank Mary so much for being our very first virtual speaker, and then Doris will be our second next time. So hopefully everybody enjoyed and learned something and had just a small bit of more normalcy in these weird times. So we appreciate everybody showing up. And if you have any feedback, feel free to send it to me on Twitter or through our Gmail account, or if you want to leave it a private note in the chat, that would be awesome. And hope everybody stays healthy.
Yeah. And if you ever need any questions or have any questions about RQDA or qualitative research in R, you can message me on Meetup. I think that's a thing.
Yep.
Yeah, so you can do that as well. And I will be sure to get back to you and try to answer your question.
I'll post the video as soon as it renders, which will take a while because it's kind of long, and I'll post a link to it on the Our Ladies Meetup, so that if you wanted to go back and look at anything once you get that RQDA installed or whatever, it'll be there for you. And thanks again, Mary. If I could start a round of applause, I would, but I'll just clap a little for you and thanks a lot. Oh, there's some people clapping. Awesome.
Thanks, Ryan.
All right.
Thank you all.
See you all around.
Bye, everybody.